He'd known for 11 years. That's the thing that broke me. Not the test. Not the results. Not even my mother's name written in the notes section in my dad's handwriting with 3 question marks next to it. It was the date printed at the top of that document, March 14th, 2013, and the fact that, after that date, my dad still showed up to every single one of my birthday dinners. Still walked me to my first day of college orientation. Still cried at my cousin's wedding because he said it made him think about walking me down the aisle someday. He did all of that knowing, and he never once flinched. My name is Joanna Merrick. I'm 27 years old, and up until 8 days ago, I was a kindergarten teacher who thought she had the most boring, stable, predictable family in all of Sudbury, Ontario. My parents had been together for 31 years. My sister Dana was 24 and still lived 15 minutes away. Sunday dinners were a non-negotiable. My dad made the same terrible potato salad every single time, and we ate it anyway because telling him the truth would have broken his heart. That was just who we were. A family that protected each other's feelings without even thinking about it. And now I'm sitting here understanding that he did the exact same thing for us for 11 years. If you're new here, please subscribe and stay with me until the end, because this story is going to take you somewhere you are not prepared for. I wasn't. I found the test on a Tuesday. My dad had passed away 6 days before that sudden cardiac arrest. No warning, no goodbye. Just a phone call at 6:42 in the morning from my mother, who could barely form a sentence. He was 58. He was supposed to come over that weekend to help me hang shelves. He'd already texted me asking if I needed wall anchors or if I had some. I never replied to that text. I keep thinking about that. In the days after, the house became the kind of place where people just appear. Aunts, neighbors, people from his office, people from the church he hadn't attended in 6 years but still somehow had relationships with. My mother moved through all of it like she was underwater. She accepted casseroles and nodded at condolences, and at night, I could hear her sitting in the kitchen not making any sound at all, just sitting there in the dark like she was waiting for something. Dana and I handled most of the arrangements. It gave us something to do, which I think is the whole point of arrangements. Keeping your hands busy so your mind doesn't fully register what's happening yet. On Tuesday, I went to his bedroom to find the folder with the life insurance documents. My mother had asked me to look and said it was probably in his dresser. I went through the top 2 drawers and found nothing. 3rd drawer, socks, folded the way he always folded them, into those little tight rolls, and underneath the 2nd layer, a manila folder with no label on the outside. I almost skipped it. I was looking for insurance paperwork, and that folder looked too thin to be anything official. But something made me open it. I don't know what. Some quiet pull. I can't explain even now. Inside was a single sheet of paper. A DNA paternity test from a private lab out of Toronto. The date at the top, March 14th, 2013, listed on the test. Subject 1, Joanna Merrick, age 9. Subject 2, Dana Merrick, age 6. Alleged father, Robert Merrick. Probability of paternity for subject 1, 0.00%. Probability of paternity for subject 2, 0.00%. I read it 4 times. I read it the way you reread something when your brain refuses to absorb it. Not because the words are complicated, but because accepting them requires dismantling something you've built your entire identity on top of. Robert Merrick was my dad. He coached my soccer team when I was 8. He taught me to drive in an empty parking lot and didn't yell once, even when I jumped a curb. He called me Joe Bear until I was old enough to be embarrassed by it, and then he called me Joe Bear anyway, just to watch me roll my eyes. He was my dad. That test said he was not. And he had known since 2013. I sat on the edge of his bed, holding that paper for a long time. The house was quiet. My mother was downstairs. Dana was at the funeral home finalizing something about the flowers. And I just sat there in my dead father's room holding proof that he had carried a secret big enough to bury a marriage, and chose not to use it. The question that hit me next was the one I wasn't ready for. If he had this test, who ordered it? Did he do it alone? Did my mother know he knew? And if she didn't, what was he planning to do with it? I folded the paper back exactly the way I found it, put it in the folder, put the folder back under the socks, walked downstairs, poured myself a glass of water, stood at the kitchen sink staring out at his garden. He was obsessive about his tomatoes. They were just starting to come in. And I thought about how a person carries something like that for 11 years without letting it change the way they love you. And I thought about my mother, sitting in the same kitchen every night in the dark, waiting for something. I just didn't know yet what she was waiting for. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in my old childhood bedroom staring at the ceiling I'd stared at 1,000 times before. The same water stain near the window that looked like a running dog. The same creak in the floorboard if you stepped too close to the closet. And I felt like a stranger in a house I'd grown up in. Like the walls knew something I was only just learning. I kept running the math without meaning to. 2013. I was 9. Dana was 6. Which meant my dad had those questions for years before that. Had to have. Because you don't just wake up one morning and decide to secretly DNA test your children. Something had to have happened. Something had to have cracked the surface first. I thought about what I remembered from being 9 years old. Normal things. School projects. A birthday party at the skating rink. My parents were together, happy as far as I could tell. No fighting I could recall. But I was 9. A 9-year-old only sees what's directly in front of her. And adults, the ones who love you, are very good at making sure you only see what they want you to. By 6 a.m., I had made a decision. I wasn't going to say anything to anyone until I understood more. Not to Dana. Not to my mother. Not yet. Because if I opened that conversation without knowing the full shape of it, I could blow up what little stability we had left in the middle of burying my dad. And if there was one thing I'd learned from finding that document, it was that my dad believed some truths could be held quietly without destroying the people around you. I wanted to understand that before I decided whether he was right. That morning my mother came downstairs at 7, looking like she hadn't slept either. She made coffee without speaking, handed me a mug the way she always had, and sat across from me at the kitchen table. There were dark circles under her eyes. Her hands were wrapped around her mug so tight, her knuckles were pale. We sat there for a few minutes just like that. Quiet, and then she said, "I keep expecting to hear him on the stairs." "Me too," I said, and I watched her face while she said it, really watched her, and something I couldn't quite name moved across her expression. Grief, obviously. But underneath the grief, something else. Something tighter. Something that looked almost like dread. I filed that away. Dana came over around noon, and the three of us went through more paperwork together. The will, the house documents, the life insurance policy which I'd found in a different drawer that morning, a proper labeled folder, nothing hidden about it. Everything was straightforward. The house was left to my mother. There was a modest life insurance payout. A savings account split between me and Dana after my mother's needs were handled. Nothing unusual. Nothing that raised questions. Except, when Dana was in the bathroom, I glanced over at my mother and said casually, "Did Dad have any other accounts? Like any we wouldn't know about?" And she went very still, not dramatically. Not in a way Dana would have noticed if she'd been in the room. Just a half second of stillness before she picked up her coffee and said, "Not that I know of." "Why?" "Just making sure we have everything," I said. "I think we have everything," she said. And she didn't look at me when she said it. That half second of stillness, I turned it over all afternoon. After Dana left, I went back upstairs under the pretense of taking a nap. I sat on the floor of my dad's bedroom and opened that drawer again. Took out the folder. This time I looked more carefully. And this time I noticed something I'd missed the first time. On the back of the test document, in my dad's handwriting, 2 lines. The first line, "Ask M about 2006. The second line, a phone number, no name attached to it. I was 3 years old in 2006. Dana wasn't born yet. I stared at that year and felt something cold settle at the base of my spine. Whatever had given my dad a reason to question things. It started before Dana even existed, which meant this wasn't just about one moment. It wasn't an accident or a single lapse. My mother had been carrying something from before Dana was even born. I photographed both sides of the document with my phone, put everything back exactly as I found it. I went downstairs and made dinner. Pasta, nothing complicated. My mother sat at the table while I cooked, and we talked about logistics. Thank you cards, returning borrowed dishes, whether to hold a small reception after the burial. Completely normal conversation. She laughed once at something small I said and then immediately looked guilty for laughing, the way people do in grief when joy feels like a betrayal. I laughed with her. I passed her the bread. I didn't say a word about 2006, but that phone number was already in my phone. And after my mother went to bed, I Googled it. It came back to a private counseling practice in Toronto, a therapist's office. And when I cross-referenced the address with a name, because I couldn't stop myself, because I was already too deep in, the therapist's name came back as a woman named Patricia Nguyen, still in practice. Reviews going back to 2009. My dad had been seeing a therapist in Toronto, a 2-hour drive from our house. Private practice, not covered under his work benefits plan. I'd just gone through every document. I would have seen it. He was paying out of pocket. For what? For how long? And why Toronto, when there were a dozen perfectly good counselors right here in Sudbury? I sat in the dark in the kitchen, my mother's spot, and stared at my phone. And I thought about how grief is supposed to make things simpler, supposed to strip everything down to what matters. But what happens when the grief is the thing that cracks something open? What happens when you lose someone, and the losing reveals a whole other person underneath the one you thought you knew? I didn't have the answer yet, but I knew I'd found a door, and it was already open. I called the therapist's office on Thursday morning. I told myself I wasn't going to. I made coffee, stood at the window watching 2 squirrels fight over something in the garden, and told myself very firmly that this was grief talking, that I was spinning, that I was looking for things to investigate because investigating felt better than sitting still in the sadness. I told myself to let it go. And then I called. A receptionist answered. Professional, warm, the kind of voice that makes you feel like whatever you're about to say won't be judged. I told her my father had recently passed away, and that I believed he may have been a patient of Dr. Nanda's. I asked if there was any way to know for certain. Not for records. I wasn't asking for records, just confirmation, because we were trying to understand his final months, and there were some things that weren't adding up. There was a pause. Then she said she couldn't confirm or deny patient relationships, but that if I wanted to leave my name and number, she could pass it along and Dr. Nguyen would reach out if she felt it was appropriate. I left my name and number. 40 minutes later, my phone rang. Dr. Nguyen had a calm, careful voice. She said she was very sorry about my father. She said she couldn't discuss session content, but that she wanted me to know that my father had been a thoughtful, caring man who loved his family deeply. And then she said something that stopped me cold. She said, "He told me about you, Joanna. He was very proud of you." She knew my name. How long had he been seeing you? I asked. Another pause. Careful. I can't give you exact details, she said, but I can tell you it was a meaningful relationship over a significant amount of time. Years? I said. I really can't say more than I have, she said gently. And then, he did leave something with me actually, a letter, in the event of his death. He asked that I contact you if you ever reached out. I think he knew you might. That landed somewhere in my chest and didn't move. He'd written a letter. He'd left it with his therapist, not with a lawyer, not in the house, not somewhere my mother could access it, with a private therapist 2 hours away, because he knew. He knew that if this ever unraveled, I would be the one pulling the thread. She mailed it that afternoon. I gave her Dana's old address to keep it from my mother's eyes. While I waited for the letter, I did what any person does when the reality they grew up in starts to peel away from the walls. I went looking for more. Not recklessly, quietly, the way my dad had been quiet. I went through old photos on my mother's Facebook, private. But she'd let me log in once to download something, and I still remembered the password. 2006, 2007, 2008. My parents looked happy. Vacation photos. backyard barbecues, Christmas mornings. But in the summer, 2006 photos, nothing. A full 4-month gap. No pictures from June, July, August, September of 2006. I'm not a dramatic person. I don't jump to conclusions. But 4 months of no photos from a family that documented everything. That's not an accident. That's a choice. That's someone deciding that whatever was happening during those 4 months should not be visible. I thought about what my dad had written. Ask Em about 2006. Em, my mother's name is Maureen. I thought about the way she'd gone still when I asked about other accounts. I thought about her sitting in the kitchen in the dark every night. And I realized she wasn't waiting for something. She was bracing for it. She knew the drawer existed. She might not have known exactly what was in it. But she knew my dad had been carrying something, had probably known for years. And now that he was gone, she was waiting to find out whether it was going to surface. The letter arrived on Saturday. Dana was supposed to come over, but she had a work thing, so I was alone in the house when the mail came. My mother had gone to a neighbor's for coffee. She'd been doing that more, getting out of the house in small doses, which seemed healthy. I had maybe 2 hours. I sat at the kitchen table and opened the envelope. His handwriting was so familiar. The slightly left-leaning slant, the way he made his lowercase e's loop wider than normal. I'd seen it on birthday cards and grocery lists and sticky notes my whole life. Seeing it now was like hearing his voice in a quiet room. The letter was 4 pages long. I'm not going to share everything he wrote. Some of it belongs only to me. But I'll tell you what I can. He wrote that he found evidence in the spring of 2006, he didn't say what kind, that made him question the origins of our family. He wrote that he had the DNA test done in 2013 because for years he'd convinced himself the evidence was circumstantial, that he was paranoid, that he was punishing himself for no reason. And then something happened in 2013 that he also didn't name, just called it the conversation. And after that, he needed to know for certain. And then he found out for certain. And he stayed. He wrote, I stayed because you were mine in every way that has ever mattered. A DNA result is a medical fact. It is not the whole truth. The whole truth is every morning, I gotta be your father. I had to stop reading for a while after that. When I came back to the letter, he addressed the thing I needed to know. He wrote that my mother had been involved with someone else during the summer of 2006. He believed that was when I was conceived. And he believed the same man was Dana's biological father, which meant it wasn't a brief lapse, but a longer, more complicated relationship than my mother had ever acknowledged. He wrote that he had forgiven her. He also wrote that he had never told her he knew, not once in 11 years, and that he wasn't sure, even now, whether that was wisdom or cowardice. He said he left that for me to decide. He ended the letter with, if you're reading this, Jobert, it means you found the drawer. I always knew you would. You were always the one who looked closely. I love you. I'm sorry I left before we could talk about this. Take care of your sister, and be gentle with your mother. She has her own weight to carry. I folded the letter and put it in my bag, and I sat in my childhood kitchen for a long time. Not crying, not angry, just very, very still. And then I heard my mother's key in the front door. I made a decision in the 3 seconds between hearing the key and hearing the door open. I was not going to blow this moment. I was not going to let grief or anger or shock make me say something that couldn't be unsaid. I had my father's letter in my bag and 11 years of his silence behind me, and I was going to handle this the way he would have, carefully, intentionally, without causing unnecessary damage. But I was also done protecting a secret that wasn't mine to protect. My mother came in carrying a small container of something, leftovers from the neighbor. She smiled when she saw me at the table, that automatic mom smile, the one that's more reflex than anything else. She put the container in the fridge and said something about the neighbor's flower beds being beautiful this year, and wasn't it funny how some people managed their garden so effortlessly? I said, Mom, can you sit down for a minute? And just like that, the smile changed. Not gone, not yet, but shifted, recalibrated, like a sensor had gone off behind her eyes. She sat. I didn't lead with the letter. I didn't lead with the DNA test. I started with something softer, something that gave her a chance to come to this herself. I said, I've been going through some of Dad's things, and I keep feeling like there's something I don't know. Something that might help me understand him better. And I feel like you might know what that is. She folded her hands on the table. What do you mean? I mean that I think the last 11 years were harder for him than we knew, I said. And I think you know why. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I've ever sat inside. It was the kind of silence that has a weight to it, a texture. She looked down at her hands, and something passed across her face that I recognized. Not guilt, exactly. More like exhaustion. Like someone who has been holding a very heavy thing for a very long time, and can feel the moment approaching when they finally have to put it down. Joanna, she said quietly. I'm not here to yell, I said. I'm not here to punish you. I just need to understand what happened. I think I've earned that. She looked up at me then, and her eyes. She had already started to cry, not dramatically, not loudly, just the slow, involuntary kind that comes when the body decides the pretending is over. How much do you know? She asked. Enough, I said, but I want to hear it from you. And she told me, not everything. I could feel the places where she edited, where she smoothed the rougher edges, where she chose words that were technically true but softer than the full truth. But she told me the shape of it. She told me there had been someone. A man she'd known before my dad. Someone who had come back into her life during a hard period in their marriage in 2006. She said it had lasted only a few months. She said she had ended it. She said she never knew, truly never knew, that it had resulted in either me or Dana. She had always believed my dad was our father, and it was only much later, when Dana was older, and started developing certain features that didn't match anyone in either family, that a doubt had lodged in the back of her mind. Did you ever get tested? I asked. She shook her head. I was afraid of the answer. Dad wasn't afraid of the answer, I said. He got the answer, and he stayed anyway. That broke something in her. She covered her mouth with both hands, and the crying shifted. Deeper, harder, the kind that's been waiting years to come out. And I sat across from her and let it happen because she needed to, and because I had my father's letter in my bag and his voice in my head saying, be gentle with your mother. She has her own weight to carry. I waited until she was quieter, and then I said, does Dana know any of this? No, she said. Nothing. Then we need to talk about how and when to tell her, I said. And that conversation includes me. I'm not going to let you decide that alone. It affects us equally. She nodded. She looked smaller than I'd ever seen her look. Not weak. Deflated. Like something structural had finally been allowed to ease. I need to ask you one more thing, I said. The man from 2006. Does Dana ever have any contact with him? Does he know about us? Her answer came quickly. Too quickly. No, she said. He moved away years ago. He doesn't know. I held her eyes for a moment. Are you sure? She looked away first. And there it was. A tiny hairline fracture in her answer. Not a lie, maybe, but not the complete truth either. The way she looked away, the half-second of it, was identical to the stillness I'd noticed days earlier when I asked about the accounts. I let it go for now. I filed it. That night I called Dana. I didn't tell her everything. Not over the phone, not without being able to see her face. But I said there were some things we needed to sit down and talk about. Something to do with Dad. Something important. She asked if everything was okay, and I said no, not entirely, but that I needed her to trust me and come over in person. She said she'd be there Sunday. I spent that night rereading my father's letter one more time, tracing the handwriting with my finger like he was still somehow reachable through it. He had known, and he had stayed, and he had loved us without asking for anything in return. And he had also known that eventually, probably, the truth would need air. He'd left it with me because he trusted me to carry it without dropping it. I wasn't going to drop it, but I had one more thing to figure out before Sunday. One loose thread my mother had given me without realizing it. She said the man from 2006 had moved away. She said he didn't know about us. She didn't say she'd stopped knowing where he was. Dana sat at the kitchen table on Sunday morning, looking the way I'd looked 8 days earlier, like someone standing on the surface of a frozen lake who has just heard a crack beneath her feet. I had thought carefully about how to do this. I had thought about order and wording, and which details to lead with and which to save. I had thought about how Dana processes things. She goes quiet, goes internal, needs time before she can speak, and I had planned for that. I put tea in front of her before I even started talkings. Small things. The way our dad always did. My mother sat beside me. I had asked her to be there. Not to speak first. Not to manage it. Just to be there and to be honest when Dana asked her questions. Because Dana deserved the truth. Delivered with presence. Not received secondhand. I started from the beginning. The drawer, the document, the therapist, the letter. I showed Dana the photos I'd taken of the test. I read her the parts of the letter I'd decided to share. And I watched my little sister's face go through 8 different kinds of pain in the span of 20 minutes. When I finished, the kitchen was very quiet. Dana didn't look at my mother right away. She looked at me and said, "So Dad knew the whole time." "Since 2013 at least," I said. "And he suspected from 2006. And he never said anything. Not to us. He processed it with a therapist in Toronto. He wrote the letter. He stayed." She was quiet for another minute, and then she turned to my mother. I had braced for anger. Dana had every right to anger. She had every right to whatever came out of her in that moment. But what came out was a question so quiet, it barely made it across the table. "Did you love him?" Dana asked. The other person. Did you love him? Or was it just something that happened? And my mother looked at her youngest daughter and said, with a steadiness I don't think any of us expected, "I loved your father. I have never stopped loving your father. What happened in 2006 was something I've spent 20 years carrying, and I'm not going to sit here and make it sound like less than it was or more than it was. I made choices. They had consequences I didn't see coming. And your dad was a better person than I deserved." Dana turned back toward the window. A long exhale. "Okay," she finally said. "Not okay. Like, it's fine. Okay, like I'm still here. Okay, like I'm still breathing and we're gonna move through this." We sat together for a long time after that. Not solving anything. Not making a plan. Just sitting in the kitchen with the morning light coming through and the garden visible through the window. Dad's tomatoes. Nobody had tended them, but they were still growing, still trying. But there was still the question I hadn't resolved, the one my mother's answer had left slightly open. I brought it up that afternoon when Dana was resting in the living room. I found my mother in the garden. She'd gone out there quietly, started doing something with the tomato cages, something to do with her hands. I stood beside her and said, without preamble, "Does he know about us or not?" She kept her hands on the cage wire. "Joanna." "I need the actual answer," I said. "Not the safe one." She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "He reached out about 2 years ago. He'd seen a photo of Dana on social media. He sent me a message saying she looked like his younger sister. He asked if..." She stopped. "He asked if she could be his," I said. She nodded. "What did you tell him?" "I told him no," she said. "I told him she was Robert's and asked him never to contact me again. And he hasn't. I don't think he believed me. But he respected it. I let that sit." "Does he know Dad passed away?" "I don't know," she said. "It's possible. Robert was listed in the obituary. So he might reach out again." "Possibly," she said. I nodded slowly. I looked at the tomatoes. They really were doing remarkably well on their own. "If he does," I said. "We decide together how to respond. All 3 of us. You don't handle that alone, and you don't protect me and Dana from it. We're adults. This is our story, too." My mother turned and looked at me. Really looked at me. And what I saw in her face wasn't relief, exactly. It was something more complicated. Recognition, maybe. Like she was seeing my father in me, and didn't know whether that made her proud or heartbroken, or both. "You sound like him," she said. "I'm trying to," I said. We stood in the garden together for a while, not talking, just the sound of wind in the fence boards and birds somewhere in the neighbors' trees, and the quiet, indifferent persistence of things that grow even when nobody is watching them. I don't know what happens next. I genuinely don't. Dana is still processing. My mother and I are somewhere in the early stages of a very long, very necessary conversation. The man from 2006 is out there, possibly knowing, possibly waiting to see what we do. But what I know is this. My dad ordered a DNA test. It told him something that would have given him every justification in the world to leave, to rage, to burn the whole thing down. And he folded it in half and put it in a drawer and chose us anyway. Every single day for 11 years, he chose us. That's not naivete, that's not weakness. That's the most deliberate, most costly kind of love there is. And I think the least I can do, the very least, is try to carry what he left with the same kind of intention he did. Gently, carefully, that dropping it. If you've made it to the end of this, thank you. Genuinely. This one took everything out of me to share, and I don't take it lightly that you stayed. If any part of this story touched you, hit that like button. It means more than you know. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if you're not subscribed yet, please do. There are more stories coming and you don't want to miss them. Drop a comment below and tell me, what would you have done? Would you have stayed like he did? I really want to know.